So first of all, hi and welcome to the first Emerging Economy Forum with the Data City and Midlands Engine. Really appreciate you all coming. It's good to see you here. So just by way of a quick round of introductions, my name is Emma Forber and I head up customer success at the Data City. The rest of the panelists in today's sessions are Fatima Garcia, who is data consultant at Data City, Harini Nagesh, who's data analyst at Data City, Charlie Hopkirk, who's senior researcher at Midlands Engine Observatory, and Alex Craven, who I'm sure a lot of you know, who is CEO and co-founder of Data City. So this is an open forum for anyone and everyone working in the public sector. So you'll see colleagues from across the board. And we are actually hoping to run one of these every month with different themes and challenges that we're all facing. So if anyone's got any ideas for future topics that they'd like to discuss, please do let us know. We'd love to hear from you. In today's session, we're going to start with an introduction to the Data City. Then we're going to move on to look at the case study between ourselves and Midlands Engine. So talking you through how we've helped them to validate industrial clusters in their region. As I say, it's an informal event, so there's during and at the end. If you do have questions along the way, if you could pop them into the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, we'll try and answer them as we go. That would be great. Okay, so I think that's it from me. I'm going to hand over to Alex now and he'll do some more introductions.
Thank you very much, Emma. Hello, everybody. Just check on mute, yeah. So we thought I think a lot of the people on the list here are sort of reasonably familiar with the work of the Data City. I thought it might be worth just starting with a reminder why we started this business. So basically, in 2014, I was running a digital marketing agency in Leeds. We were a top 100 agency in the UK and top 5 in Leeds. And the first Tech Nation report came out, which was a list of all of the digital agencies in the UK. And my business wasn't in it. And when I looked at the list, I started looking for my competitors and peers, and about 3 out of 4 of those weren't in it either. And then I read the methodology, and the methodology took me to the list of SIC codes that had been used to define the sector. And I very quickly understood why we weren't in it. And that led me on a little journey of discovery into the problems that people trying to identify new and emerging sectors were facing when trying to work with the sort of rigid and outdated SIC code system. To cut a long story short, I started working with Paul Connell, one of the other co-founders here, who's running the Open Data Institute node in Leeds, who was already reasonably familiar with these issues. That conversation led to us thinking we could do better by actually trying to use machine learning to machine read the website text of businesses to understand what they do from their own mouths, if you like. And we were commissioned to produce a sort of better view of that digital agency sector for Leeds, published that on a website, and got a constant influx of people looking for similar sorts of data solutions. So we decided to turn that into a business, and that's the Data City. So fast forward about 6 years now. We've got a platform that tries to address these problems. So I'm sure most of the people on here know, obviously, this is a system developed in 1938, last updated in 2007. We did a piece of analysis and over 30% of the UK business base has ticked one of the others, not elsewhere classified, options in the company's house. We're also increasingly looking at the accuracy of the data contained within SIC code. So we're going to produce some statistical analysis of this. But for instance, even SIC codes where it seems inconceivable that people could misselect an SIC code, and one of the ones we were looking at yesterday was taxidermy. Most of the companies in the SIC code don't do taxidermy. So there's issues even within the SIC code system, which I think are problematic. And what we're trying to do is produce a system that works alongside that. So There are classifications which don't exist in the SRC ecosystem where we produce our own, but we work at company level, so you can always relate our data to the SRC ecosystem and historical analysis, which we understand is important. We've built now over 350 classifications, so we have a sort of off-the-shelf solution where you can just log into the platform, and we have, for instance, mapped the net zero economy with the CBI. We're doing a big piece of work on fintech with the trade association that represents the fintech sector, and there's over 20 sort of verticals within that, and many others. That's all available in platform, but also we have the ability in our platform, and I'm going to do a quick demonstration to create new classifications should you need them if they don't exist. Working with the public sector, what we've been able to do is use that work and make it available to the other users of the platform. So we're very keen. Obviously, in the private sector, they're not very keen for their sector definitions to be shared with what they would perceive to be their competitors. But in the public sector, fortunately, we don't have those sort of competitive rivalries. When we do work with BAYS or DCMS and Knowledge Transfer Network and Innovate UK, historically, they've been very keen for us to publish those classifications on the platform for your use. So that's all available there. The articles that we produce, as we call them, real-time industrial classifications, are predominantly built using taxonomies that have been published by either academics or sectoral experts. There's a lot of work goes into the quality assurance of those data sets, and what we're trying to do is produce the sort of, an alternative classification system that works with the SRC ecosystem that you can have confidence in the accuracy of the data. As with all data sets, it's not perfect, but it's constantly improving. And I think part of what we're looking for in these sessions is that sort of feedback from our platform users and users of our data on how we can improve it, both from accuracy but also from a sort of usefulness and what else can we do around it. Sorry, I've covered that slide. So we've got 4 main sort of products now, and 2 of these are pretty new. So the first is we have a platform which has all active UK companies in it, so all 5 million companies in there, and you can use it to do sort of traditional SRC code or financial analysis, geographic analysis of the business base that you're interested in. We have managed service support as well. So we have sort of 2 layers of that. So Fatima and Harini, who you'll hear from later, run our sort of analyst and consulting support. We don't do economic reports ourselves. What we do is evidence-based for economic reports, typically working with public sector consulting partners or in-house teams within government departments or local government teams. We are working with the High Value Manufacturing Catapult and the Digital Catapult on publishing a directory, which is basically our platform, but as a public-facing asset for the UK manufacturing sector. So this is an attempt to address the lack of transparency in the supply chain, which was really highlighted during COVID, and the inability to find PPE providers and so on. So there's you can actually log on to the Digital Catapult website, and you'll find there's an invitation there for people to come and do testing of the platform as we release it. And what this means is we'll publish all of the details of all the companies that represent the UK manufacturing sector, both in a traditional SRC code view, but also using our Arctic view. And there's the ability for those companies to claim their own profiles and add and amend data on themselves. So this is another way of improving the quality of the analysis that we produce, but also the ability to have something in the public domain that says this is UK manufacturing sector and the corresponding dashboards and insights that go with that. And then the other big piece for us that we're working on at the moment is the ability to look globally. So we've mapped the UK business base, but what we'd like to be able to do is show, for instance, what the global fintech sector is, and then you can have a look at what the comparative strengths of the UK are within it. I think there's also an opportunity that flows from that for sort of regional economics teams to perhaps look at a different way, rather than comparing UK cities to UK cities, actually find cities which are more like their business base on an international scale.
Alex, sorry to interrupt. We've just had a question, if you don't mind. So this is from Bumi Sag. I can't see your full name, sorry, but it says
so Bumi from NACE. So they're completely different. The way our classification works, so NACE are still relying on a business choosing a classification. Our classifications work on building a machine learning training set of a sector using website text, and I'm going to show you in a minute. And then what the machine learning does is it finds all the other companies that say they provide the same goods or services using their website text. So our data could sit on top of or alongside DNA ICS classifications. And some of you may be aware also that there's an update to the SIS ecosystem being planned. It's been ongoing for something like 15 years now. But when that comes out, I mean, the problem there is you're trying to get sort of global agreement on what those codes should be. And also, NAICS is predominantly sort of adopted outside of the UK. We don't really use it here. But it's a standard rigid classification system with a hierarchical approach, very similar to SIC, whereas ours is a what's called a polyhierarchical. So there's no sort of parent-child relationship other than groupings. Okay. I think that's probably just can't see my screen because of the Q&A box. I need to close it. So where we stand today, we've got over 80 million matched URLs. So we've matched about, of the 5 million active UK companies, we've matched about 1.6 million to their website. That you may or may not be familiar, but of the UK business base of 5 million, there are probably only about 1.8 to 2 million companies that would ever have a website, realistically. So there's a lot of special purpose vehicles whose job is to hold things like property assets for pension funds. There's a lot of sort of non-trading entities within groups and what have you. So we're trying to get to as close as possible of that. But then there's the other complexity that some particularly smaller companies don't have websites, may have a Facebook page or other assets instead, which is a technical challenge we're still working on. That said, we take the whole of company's house via Credit Safe and Red Flag, and all that data is in our platform. And then what we're doing is adding data points that we're extracting from websites to the data that we get from company financials providers. And then you'll see the logos below. We've also done an increasing number of partnerships with other data providers. So we've got a partnership with Dealroom where we add equity investment data. So that gives you the total amount raised and last raise date at a company level. So when you're looking at a sector, you can see how much private equity investment that sector raising, and you can then look at that geographically. So you can look at it in your particular geography. Some of you may be familiar with Lightcast, who used to be called MC Burning Glass, who just recently rebranded. So we've worked on a company level join. So this is where we're adding the job ads that they've seen for companies at company level. So you can see how many adverts are companies advertising and the SOC 4 codes. So you get the skills and the job titles, and you also get the salary range advertised at company level, which you can then aggregate up to a sectoral view. You can look geospatially around a geography, and then finally you can look temporarily across time, whether you've got trends going up or down. And then we've also got Innovate UK and 360 Giving grant data as well. And actually combining that data with ours gives you the ability to say, right, let's say we have an agritech specialism or cluster in our geography. Are they accessing grant funding? Is the grant funding being used successfully to leverage equity funding? And then are we seeing growth of those businesses in terms of people they employ and their financial trajectories? And hopefully that's quite a powerful data set for you to use to try and understand what's going on in your regional and national economies. Okay, so I'm going to attempt to jump out of this and into my browser. Okay. Can everybody see my screen okay? Have I got
You can see the PowerPoint still.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
Better. Okay. So I'm just going to give you a very quick tour of the platform. So this is my workspace when I log in, and here I can see the list I've been building. Got two types of lists. We can use machine learning, or we can just filter, like you might be familiar in other platforms like Fame or Orbis. We can also access any of the 350 pre-built sectors that we have in the platform. So we've got a wide range of categories here, and each of these has the actual Arctic verticals within them. We've got everything about tech. We've mapped this space economy with the energy satellite catapult, fintech, omics, all sorts of exciting things in here. I'll just quickly show you the explore section. So if we pick the danger of screen sharing. This does not normally take this long. Okay. Okay, I will start by showing you the machine learning list broken, how we build our own classifications. So what we're looking for is a training set of companies that actually operate in a particular sector. And we can do that in a couple of ways. We may already know companies that operate in vertical farming. So this is an element of the agri-tech sector. Or we can look for examples. And because we hold up to 75 pages of website text per company, we can use our platform a bit like Google. So we can type vertical farming in as a keyword, and we can search the website text of those companies. Difference here being that it's not Google, so it's not full of adverts, and these results haven't been manipulated by people trying to game the rankings in Google. So this is just strictly a count of the number of times this keyword has appeared on the websites of these companies. Gives me the top 50 results because we're looking for good examples of the sector. What we then do is have a look at the websites of these companies. And if this is a good example of a vertical farming company, I can add it to my machine learning classifier. So I click add here, and it's in the machine learning classifier. For the sake of speed, what we would then do is carefully select a lot of these. So often our Arctic training sets might have 100 positives. You can actually start the process with as few as 3. So I'm just going to add 4 in total here, just because I've done this a few times and I know which are good examples and get a good result. But yeah, unsurprisingly, Vertical Farming Limited are a vertical farming company. Innovation Agri-Tech Group do vertical farming, and EVF Farms do too. So I'm just going to add these 4 companies and hit build list. I'm just going to So what this has done is it's, because I've only added positives, it's ranked all of the websites in our platform from the most like the training set to the least like. So we've got all the websites here sorted by how similar to the training set they are. So this is a machine learning based approach looking for the patterns of language that are shared by the 4 websites that I've given it. And it's clustering around lots of different groups of patterns of shared language. What I then need to do is give it examples of things that I'm not interested in, so it can remove the companies it doesn't think meet the threshold. So it scores each one, and we've set the cutoff of 0. And what we're looking to do is build this a list of companies where every company with score above 0 looks like a vertical farming company, and every company with score below 0 is not something that we're interested in. So the quickest way to do this is just to go to the bottom of the list. So I'll go to page 39,858. These are the least like the training set. And what I'll do is I'll add these as negatives. So I'm just going to go through. Excuse some of the content of these websites can be a bit interesting. Oops, sorry, I hit the wrong button. Let's do that again. Okay, so what it's now done is removed every company it doesn't think meets the cutoff. So we're down to 60 companies. And these are all good examples of vertical farming companies. What we can do, and I'll spare you this, but we would then add the ones here that we like the look of as positives to increase its understanding of the sort of breadth of activity of the sector, and keep running these training runs until we've stopped finding good examples. And then we've built a sectoral list of vertical farming companies. So there are some limitations obviously here. If a company doesn't have a website, we can't find it. If a company doesn't say what we're not psychic, we can't work out that it's doing vertical farming if it doesn't talk about it. And the final thing is some websites are not machine readable. They're so poorly designed. So there are, like no data set is perfect, but historically finding vertical farming companies would have typically required somebody to, sit down and Google one at a time, find the company, then find them in company's house, add the URL to the financials so you could then do the analysis. Whilst we're here, I'll take a little tour of the data that we hold. So this is the vertical farming company that I chose in the training set. See, it's in the training set with a little green plus here. So what we're doing is taking a little screenshot of the website, description of what they do taken from their website. You can see it's been classified in one of our Arctics, which is agritech. We've got data from Red Flag, where a company has a turnover of less than 10 million. They estimate the turnover. So it's an estimate, not a declared figure, and the number of employees based on the company financials information that they do have to supply. So it's typically looking at ratios between net asset position and debtors fully due over 12 months, looking at similar companies and then trying to estimate based on that what they might be. So their turnover won't be 555,000, but what's for sure is it definitely isn't typically something like 6 million. It will be accurate ish. We've got contact details, registered address, social media profiles. We've got an estimated growth per year based on their historical financial performance. So this is a company that's grown 182%. We've got an estimated CO2 intensity. We've got the ownership structure, so cap table, and we've got the actual declared company financials going back to when they incorporated. We've got 360 giving funding data here, Innovate funding grants, and if they'd raised any money from deal room, which they haven't, we'd have a deal room data point here as well. So there's a lot of information, and then all of this can be very quickly visualized as a report. So you just I've got my 60 vertical farming companies, hit analyze, and what this does is it aggregates the view of this sector. So what's the total turnover, how many people they're employing, how much equity investment have they raised, how much Innovate UK grant funding have they accumulated, and is the sector growing? So here we have a sector that's growing by 5.3% per annum.
Alex, sorry to interrupt. Yeah. We just had a question from Patrick Stewart. It says, does your financial data come from a company's house API or from a third party?
The answer is both. So we take company's house data, and then we also take company's house data via CreditSafe and Red Flag. So CreditSafe fix a lot of the structural issues in company's house data, which suffers from companies still filing their accounts via PDF, particularly PLCs. and so where they OCR out that content, standardize it and push it back in the way that we can easily ingest it in platform. They credit safe in the course of their business also collect additional data. So they, because they're used for credit referencing constantly, companies self-correct their information. So they have things like better employee count. They have multiple locations. So we have not just registered address. If a company's got more than one location, we will have locations. It's not perfect coverage from credit safe and red flag, but also we can scrape it from their contact pages. So yeah, I think that probably answers the question, doesn't it? Yeah. Okay. So here we've got summary of the sector by location. We've got a range of locations standard in the platform: local authority, constituency, LEP, and that's one region. You can also have a look at information from their websites. So what are the over-indexing keywords on their websites? Similar sort of views to so employee data, so distribution by band over time. This is the Lightcast data. So here you've got the job adverts posted. I think it's updated quarterly. So obviously I've only picked 60 companies here, so it's a small data set, but you can see the SOC 4 codes and name, average salary, and job postings by skill. We've then got how this sector, this I've built a custom list where these companies in our Arctics and also in the SIC code system. And this is quite fascinating, quite funny. Some of our sectors might have over 500 SIC codes listed, just to show you how difficult those companies have found it to pinpoint what they do in the traditional sectoral classifications. Growth over time, and then we've got a lot of company financials data here. So here you've got the last funding date for deal room, innovate grant funding, turnover, profit, assets, liabilities. Okay, so there is a little bit more, and then I'll move on. I'll sort of stop there. This is the ability to filter all 5 million companies. So here you can select any of our Arctics. You can select SIC codes. You've got your geography filters. You can then filter by keyword. So this is the ability so if you'd picked, let's say, agritech, and you wanted to find very specific products or services, you can search the website text of their websites to identify individual companies within that, or exclude them. So you can remove companies from a list to really focus on things that you're interested in. We've got a range of company financial filters. You can look at the incorporation dates and isolate startups or whatever. And also we built with some work with Manchester on using R&D grant data, tax credit data, to identify companies that are perhaps more innovative as a result of that R&D investment, and train machine learning on a classifier to look at their website text. And then what we found was that heavily invested companies claiming R&D tax credits look more innovative than companies that don't generally. It's not perfect. And then we've created a 3-star innovation score. So this is a way of, if you built a sector or you're looking at a sector and you want to try and find the most innovative companies, this will sort that list, pick the 3-star companies, and then we go from there. Again, it's not perfect, but it is a good way of finding innovative companies. Okay, I think that's it probably from me. If you have any other questions, please do ask away, but equally if anybody wants us to take you through it afterwards, we're more than happy to arrange platform demos, free trials, etc. Okay, so I think you can kick me out now, Fatima. You're on mute, Fatima. Yeah.
There we go. Sorry about that. Can you all see my screen now? Brilliant. So we're going to start talking a little bit about our project, And just so you get a sense of who's going to be talking, I'm Fatima, consultant at the Data City, and Charlie and Harini will be joining me to just introduce a little bit what we've done and how our platform and our method help Midlands Engine to validate the series, just like, get to an output that was relevant for them for policymaking. So I will first give the floor to Charlie so he can introduce the project from his point of view. So Charlie, I will start with your slides now.
Thanks, Fatima. I hope you can all hear me. Let me know if not, and if it's not clear. So yeah, hi everyone. I'm Charlie Hopkirk. I'm a senior researcher at Midlands Engine Observatory. So just a very brief background on Midlands Engine. So we're a pan-regional apolitical partnership that kind of convenes and connects, working with partners as a kind of focal point to drive economic growth. So partners being local authorities, LEPs, etc. So we're kind of there to kind of connect, champion, and amplify essentially, rather than kind of deliver or that kind of thing. So think kind of Northern Powerhouse, but Midlands Engine. And I sit within our observatory for kind of half of my week, essentially. So providing that kind of data intelligence to kind of collate and present, again, trying to kind of heighten the region for within different areas of the Midlands. So where this kind of project kind of comes from sits within our kind of internationalization work stream. So we did have a kind of project lead on internationalization. So Josh Hawkins, who kind of project managed this project, so his secondment at the moment's come to an end. So I'm here just to kind of present, I suppose, on his behalf and the project's behalf, but I was heavily involved on the kind of data and insight side, working with partners such as Data City. So that's where it kind of sits thematically in terms of this project. So what we were really thinking of was how can we kind of add weight and evidence to the idea of clusters across the region. So yeah, where are the clusters of strength? Are our kind of perceptions correct in terms of where we think areas of sector and cluster strength are across the region? And how can we kind of work with real independent expertise to provide a framework for analysing clusters now, but also kind of in the future as well? So we're kind of trying to fill that gap of regional aggregation of strengths and opportunities across the region that maybe kind of partners individually may not be able to do themselves, but also providing that bespoke package of measures to evaluate the potential growth of clusters themselves. So that kind of key project focus essentially was to identify and evaluate clusters and creating that analytical framework, in particular just to kind of pull on some of these key bullet points here. So help defining and articulate what the kind of international and domestic investment potential was of clusters, provide some of that data and insight across global investment trends and market conditions, then also evaluate which clusters we thought had the greatest potential for investment over the kind of next 5 to 10 years, again, through that bespoke package of measures. But then also to present this in a kind of innovative and compelling way in the form of a set of regional scorecards, which I'll come on to file. So kind of a really, just to go back very briefly, Fatima, sorry, I was just going to pick up on all our great partners on the project. So yeah, we used a number of different well, we commissioned the project as a kind of multi-partner approach. So as you can see, the logos on the right there. So CBI heavily involved on the kind of reporting and kind of pulling together the data, kind of cutting across the other kind of more data heavy partners, which were WavTech on the kind of international inward investment side in particular, Bowhurst, another business database you may have heard of, particularly around kind of innovation, R&D and scale up, and then Data City, of course, well, I won't say most valued partner just in case anyone else is here, but yeah, really important in terms of that business database and the validation and kind of presentation of clusters, including that really important piece on the spatial side of things as well. Yeah, so here's definitely on the next slide now. Thanks for that. I suppose just to get this in early, this certainly wasn't a project about Midlands Engine definitively telling partners what is or what is not a cluster or sector of strength in the Midlands or in specific localities, but kind of more of a foundational piece of work exploring clusters and kind of the measures of their potential to attract further investment. So within this, we have portrayed kind of 23 what we call validated or reviewed clusters based on the analysis of the experts in the project. But it's not to say that there's not others that we haven't encountered, and I kind of see this as a framework that we can apply in future as clusters inevitably kind of change and evolve, etc. But yeah, this slide, I'm just trying to kind of, without taking too much of Fatima and Harini's explanation of what they did on the project, but just to kind of highlight some of the areas that Data City particularly inputted into the project. So it's a fairly hefty kind of multi-stage process. So we kind of identified and validated clusters. There was literature review, business workshops, some kind of more kind of high-level investment trends, and then that development of the analytical framework and scorecards themselves, along with a final report. All the partners inputted into different aspects, but yeah, just on kind of the Data City side, so I'll just pick on a few bits in particular here. So in terms of that cluster validation or review of clusters, so this was really important. So we kind of went through a process of saying, here are the kind of 100 or so declared clusters in the region based on what partners and what ourselves have said in the past. So what is the kind of perceived strength of sectors and clusters in the region? Then we obviously wanted to test that, and the Data City kind of taxonomy was really important for doing this. But alongside Bohurst, there was the kind of testing of each of those clusters to see if they were kind of as relevant and as scalable as we maybe thought they were, but then also to kind of test the Data City data to see if they're kind of new clusters that we were missing out on as well. And Data City, as they'll kind of talk about, used a really good kind of location quotient technique to do this, to help us kind of validate and review which were in fact kind of clusters at this level. The other aspect I was going to pick up on was just the analytical framework, which then led on to the presentation of the regional scorecards. So yeah, there were these. So the analytical framework, as you'll see on the scorecard, essentially was about which metrics should we use to kind of best present or analyze what clusters are kind of strength. So we looked at kind of some key areas. So you look at skills, business, and metrics within that. So Data City were kind of at the heart of that understanding of providing those kind of cluster specific data sets and aggregating some of that key company data that Alex is talking about there. So in particular, the kind of number of businesses in each cluster, high growth, foreign owned, that kind of thing for use within the wider analytical framework. Though that kind of collected data then ultimately is presented in the final 23 pan-regional cluster scorecards. So the way we've done the project is there's 23 clusters that have been identified. Each will have a regional scorecard for the Midlands Engine, reflecting the key metrics within that. But then there's also some of that local authority data as well, which we've used Data City data to map, as you'll see later on. So yeah, without going into too much more detail, because I think Harini and Fatima will cover it, but yeah, this was really about Data City kind of developing that methodology to evaluate our kind of hypothesis at the start, and then collecting the data for kind of validation, but also the presentation of clusters in the end, particularly on those kind of key business metrics. But I'll highlight that later on when I kind of show you the scorecard. But yeah, Fatima, for the time being, if I hand back over to you, I think.
Thank you, Charlie. So for us, this project was all about validating clusters, as Charlie has already introduced. But what we observed is that the sectors, these clusters, were working in, if that makes sense, were not very well represented by SIC codes. So our job here was to create the articles and to create the necessary frameworks to capture the relevant companies that would be pertaining to this cluster. So just to give you a little bit, sectors, what kind of sectors were we targeting? We mapped sectors such as net zero transport, digital ledger technologies or blockchain, or the circular economy. So this was the way we understood it. In order to validate these clusters, we actually need to understand how the sector performs at the national level. and quantify how much of that sector is actually located within the boundaries of Midlands Engine. And this is how we develop and we apply the Arctic methodology, and that Alex has briefly mentioned before, and that Harini will explain a little bit more right now. So Harini, if you want to take the floor and go a little bit through the Arctic method.
Yeah, thanks, Fatima. So with regards to this project and in general, how do we go about building? I think Alex has covered of most of it, but just to give you a brief. So Arctics use our main thing is the language. We take the language and we match it over different companies, and we see how is there a commonality and how did it goes along. So basically language plays a key role in Arctic classification, and we generally work with experts. I know, sometimes it can be very difficult when some companies don't really mention what sort of work they do. So that's when the experts come in and say that they have a good understanding of regional capabilities, and they know very good knowledge that brings into the Arctic methodology, and they can try to classify and put them, they also a company that does this kind of work. So that's how we bridge this gap we have with how companies describe themselves. So with language, we find it quite flexible to classify companies in general. And especially one of the key strengths we have tried to understand with Arctics is the ability to see the relatedness between different sectors. So Arctics, as we see, the language generally tends to allow classification of companies in different pockets of sectors. So a company can be doing artificial intelligence and can call themselves an agri-tech company. So you can see those companies being classified in both of them. So they do different things. So we classify them to make sure to understand the relationships between different sectors. And this has led to an interesting piece of work with Bennett Institute to understand the sectoral relatedness and the supply chain between different sectors. So that's one of the key things that Arctics has, is the flexibility to classify in different pockets, and at the same time understand the supply chain network, and even with new data is coming in, transfer of skills between these sectors would give you a direction towards going more or digging deep into those research work. So I just move on the slide, sorry Fatima. Yeah, so I think all of these information has been covered by Alex. I'm not going to go dig deep into it, but a lot of information for this particular project, we worked on more than 30 different Arctics. So with these already existing cluster information that they've provided by Midlands Engine, we matched them to Arctics, and we used a combination of Arctics, or even built different Arctics for this project. We presented as a group. For example, we don't have an Arctic named circular economy, but it's a bits and pieces from different Arctics put together. And that's, again, talks about how language can, it's not just if you can't find something that you're looking out for in a particular Arctic, it can be that you can bring different pieces together and it can fit that jigsaw puzzle that you're trying to pull as a sector. So one of the key things that was very fundamental with regards to this project was the location quotients. So with regards to employees, with regards to the turnover and the number of companies in that sector. So those were the key things in validating cluster, and Fatima will go more about how we went about it. And also we have more, since that project, we have more data with regards to growth scores, with regards to Innovate UK funding. But back then we used the financial information from Companies House, Red Flag, and Credit Safe. So that's a bit about Arctics. And this is pretty much what Alex has showed, so I don't want to go much into it, but this is pretty much what we did with regards to Arctics and how we pulled that information into our platform and gave out a different kind of data set that helped in validating those clusters, and built the data set to make sure it's a cluster and how we validate it. So I'll just give it on to Fatima to talk more about the validation process.
Thank you, Harini. That was great. Basically, yeah, Harini has explained how we got to the underlying data that guided all the validation of our the clusters from our side. So we built those articles at the national level, and then we had to decide which kind of metrics we would use to actually consider a cluster validated. So as you can see, we have a wide variety of data points in the platform. And we had to find a method that could be applicable to all sectors at the same time. So after conversations with Midlands Engine and in collaboration with them, we identified 3 different indicators of clustering that we were using to say, this is definitely a sector that has a regional strength in the Midlands in comparison to the rest of the UK. So the first one, as Harini has already mentioned, was using location quotients that basically measure specialization, regional specialization in comparison to the national average. And we use location quotients for 3 different variables: business counts, employee numbers, and turnovers. So, and if there were more than 20 local authorities, more than 3 local authorities pertaining to the Midlands Engine on the top 20 at the national level across those 3 different variables, that would give us an indication that the Midlands had definitely a regional strength in comparison with to other areas in the UK. And that is a very good indication of clustering and where in which local authority. So we apply that to all 30 different data sets, articles that we provided. Then we also looked a little bit into the financials, because this is it is always a very important point. And what we were looking was an upward projection for both net worth and turnover values. So what we really needed to see is whether the actual net worth and turnover were cohesive, and if they actually showed that there was, that the sector was doing well for the past 4 years, if that makes sense. And the last thing that we considered is a minimum, is that these sectors, in order to be validated, to be understood as potential clusters, they needed to have a minimum growth rate of 125% during the last almost 10-year period. 125% was selected because it is an indicator that is being used in different kinds of economic research and industrial research, that just tells us that it's more than doubled the rate of growth in the region. It's more than doubling. And that is always when it crosses that 120% threshold, that is a very good indication that the sector is having a very good progression and it's doing, it's doing well. So this is, there you see a little image of one of the maps that we provided, and the underlying data was then used for the scorecards. So this is not exactly what you will see on the scorecards, but this is one of the examples that we provided, that fundamentally you can see here all the local authorities pertaining to the region covered by Midlands Engine and the location quotient value for a particular sector. So you can easily see which regions have a highest a higher concentration of these kind of businesses and which ones don't. And we hope it made the job of validating clusters and identifying into different regions easier for me. And now I am going to give the floor again to Charlie so he can introduce a little bit what were the outputs of the project, how does it look like, and what did it produce. So
yeah, thanks Fatima. So one of the key outputs of the project was these regional scorecards. So scorecards themselves are kind of an aggregation of some of the key clusters across the Midlands Engine, the kind of outputs of all the data that was collected, building upon the kind of process of the kind of declared clusters in the beginning to then these kind of regional ones that will hopefully be useful for partners to promote. So there's 23 in total. So this example's for aerospace, but then you can go to circular economy, education technology, nuclear, video games, etc. So I can provide a list to people who want them, or once everything's published, obviously you'll be able to see 23 versions of this, which hopefully will be really interesting and really good for partners in the region in particular to use, or an approach to use further for other areas or for other clusters within our region. So just to take you briefly through what we can see on this first page of the scorecard. So as you'll see the kind of subheadings in the kind of blue or teal or turquoise or whatever your perceptions of color are, where we're picking up on some of the key areas of metrics. So access to skills and talent, business population, cluster support environment, innovation, R&D, investment trends, and details as well. So this is kind of reflective of that analytical framework we talked about. So this is where multiple partners are kind of providing data across these different metrics, which were then kind of agreed on to be used in the scorecard. Again, a full kind of process that's outlined in a report that also will come out with this as well, led by CBI. Those kind of, is there a question you want me to pick up on? Okay, just a comment for now. So just the highlight in yellow here is just clearly where the Data City data itself is presented on the scorecard. So yeah, really important in terms of the business population and also the Innovate UK funding. So we've got stuff in here. This one's for aerospace, so around the amount of businesses that are in that cluster in the Midlands, key companies, high growth companies, the number of kind of startups and foreign owned businesses as well. That all comes with commentary both here and around here. I'm using my cursor, but obviously you can't see my cursor, but on the right and in the introduction. So I suppose this just reflects that, yeah, the Data City data and methodology is really important, both in terms of that validation process to get to that list of 23, working with us at Midlands Engine and other partners, but then also a key part of that presentation of the data, even more kind of reflective in that second page of the maps. If you just move on a slide, Fatima, cheers. So yeah, even more reflective here is that, yeah, that mapping piece. These maps look slightly different because we've essentially mapped the Data City data on the maps, on the two maps on the left. Again, yeah, reflecting that kind of real important spatial look of where in the region do we see these sector strengths. So if you can't see that the top map's based on aerospace businesses and the bottom one's based on employees. So yeah, just to reiterate, that comes from the Data City data, and then we can kind of highlight some of the key areas that we see as being particularly important for this cluster. So for aerospace, you'll see Derby and Derbyshire, parts of the West Midlands, Warwickshire, etc. So all the kind of local authority data is some of the key local authorities are listed on the right hand side. So essentially there'll be 23 of these scorecards, which are 2 pages that I've just demonstrated there, hopefully providing, as I say, useful collateral for all sorts of different partners in the region, and potentially a framework moving forward for different clusters or even different regions as well.
Great, Charlie. And if you mind talking a little bit through the learnings and challenges you Midlands Engine got from this project. Yeah,
definitely. Yeah. So I think firstly, the kind of richness and variety of Data City sources were really important for bolstering that depth and quality of the project, both in, as I said before, both in terms of that analytical framework and that kind of earlier stage of developing the data side of things, and then obviously the presentation of the data at the end as well, in terms of the scorecards and the report, really providing that independent view of cluster validation for the region. And I suppose importantly, and kind of drawing on some of what Alex and Harini said, in particular around understanding both the traditional and emerging cluster areas. So going beyond the SIT codes when required, but also the flexibility of the tool and the method means that where SIT codes may be still a better option, which it still is in some case. We can still use that data, but I suppose that shouldn't get in the way of how useful Data City is for understanding those newer and emerging businesses. So going beyond the kind of issues with SIT codes to come up with some really interesting data. There is still some, I suppose, we found there was quite a few kind of company address complications and anomalies. And I think Alex said before, obviously no data sets are perfect. And I think that the Data City method really is helping reduce these issues. But identifying that true value of a company in a cluster or locality still remains difficult. In some, we might find a cluster that has, say, a very large company, say 100,000 jobs or something like that. It has a postcode in a Midlands Engine local authority, but it might just be an offshoot of that company, a holding company or something with actual no activity there. So that did require some kind of manual checking. But yeah, all I'd say is the data sets aren't perfect, but there's still that issue with reporting of information, I suppose, which will be very difficult to get around, but I'm sure Data City are working on it. What I would also say is, yeah, that platform access and understanding was really important as well. So I don't know if it's been mentioned, but all the data we've used on this project is now on the platform for us to use and to kind of filter and all that kind of thing. So understanding how to use the platform has been really important. I think we could have maybe been a little bit more efficient at the start in terms of ensuring that we ourselves knew exactly how to use the platform and use all the different filters and what they meant. But yeah, having all that data now is a really useful tool for ourselves and hopefully our partners as well. Just to pick up really quickly, so it's obvious that having multiple different partners, perspectives and definitions is a challenge and a strength, really. So kind of different perspectives, really good, different results, always helpful, and kind of, yeah, real expertise in the room essentially. But then when it comes to the different cluster sector definitions or geographical boundaries, there's obviously been challenges for us to kind of iron out on that front. But finally, I'll just say that that the project hopefully has provided a real framework for further work. I think there's always going to be a need for that knowledge beyond the data, but the depth of partners like Data City has kind of been a real asset. And there is a quote from Josh, the project manager, so I could say on his behalf that, yeah, working with Data City was a pleasure and particularly helpful for understanding those new and emerging businesses. He also called the tool incredibly useful and remarkably flexible. So that's not my words, that's the project manager, but I thought I'd leave it with that in terms of the learnings and challenges.
Thank you, Charlie. That was great. We did find some challenges ourselves as well, and we also learned some stuff. So we want to just give you a very brief overview on that. Well, the first thing is all about this process of validating clusters. When you try to do this piece of work with several partners, you first need to get to some form of consensus on, for example, what is a cluster? Because if you go on existing literature, there are several different ways in which the word cluster is defined and the way that it may be identified. So for us, that was one very relevant initial challenge, in the sense of, like, we need to get a cohesive understanding of what a cluster is in order to be able to find the most relevant metrics and methods to validate them. And this is how I get to my second point. We did have to find, as I introduced, 3 different indicators that would tell us whether a cluster is validated. And this is not an easy task when you work with such a wide range of sectors, because we had, as I mentioned, sectors like blockchain that are not that big and much wider, or, like, in terms of company numbers, much bigger sectors like advanced manufacturing. So how do we find a set of metrics that can be applied to all these different sectors with all the different characteristics and that are meaningful? Well, what we learned is that when we use metrics that are relative, meaning that we are not basing our conclusions on absolute counts of businesses, for example, we are basing our conclusions on the over-indexing of that kind of businesses in that area, on one hand, that is location quotients. or the growth of that sector, what we're doing is not comparing absolute numbers with absolute numbers, but we're comparing tendencies or trends. And that generally helps overcoming those gaps or those big bridges between sectors. And the last thing that I will introduce myself is this matter of communicating. How do we communicate this effectively to a large number of partners that are doing their own methodologies and that are doing their own piece of work for the same project, so we can collaborate and co-produce all the information that is necessary. So this matter of communication and being able to produce the relevant internal reports and relevant internal images that just hopefully makes it easier for everybody to go through the relevant material was something that we put a lot of thought about, because as you can understand, 30 sectors is this produces a lot of material, and it is important that everybody can understand it well. Now I will just hand over to Harini, because she's going to talk a little bit about the learnings and challenges regarding Arctics for this project.
Yeah, and thanks, Fatima. So in this project specifically, one key learning would be as to, I've mentioned it before, like understanding the sectors beyond Arctics and using a combination of Arctics. And for example, circular economy, we don't have an Arctic there, but we had to think of how to put it together and what sort of Arctics would work together. And that was a quite interesting learning. Just about it's about how we describe it and how sort of we can build different Arctics, even if Arctics, the number of Arctics are limited in number. So that's a really piece of insight learning from the project. And especially we say like this, SICs are bad, but for some traditional sectors, SICs are very well classified, and we have to accept and acknowledge the fact. And we also did a mixed approach, for example, with textiles, and it was already very well defined in SICs, and we tried to have a mixed approach where we tried to bridge in those gaps where, like, for example, technical textiles is a very emerging kind of sector, so we tried to bring the Arctic approach in. So it's important that we also make use of what's existing and try to make the best out of it, use a mixed approach to it, and acknowledge the fact that some traditional sectors can still be defined through SICs. And the next one is, when we were doing this project, Fatima had mentioned, like, we built more than 30 different Arctics, and we were working on making it better, updating those Arctics and building it. And back then our platform wasn't this amazingly instant classification was impossible. So the time was still a challenge for us, but now I guess it not just improved with the version 4 with the instant classification. It's not just about time, but the quality of the data set that has been updated very well, and it also increases the use. It's more user friendly right now, and it's always been a challenge back then for people to use machine learning to build their own list, and I think we've come a long way, and the right way as well. So we have to address that challenge very well. So yeah, these are some very interesting and learning challenges we had during this project.
That's great. And now, Charlie, if you'd like to tell us what comes next.
Yeah, just really briefly. So as before, the outputs which will come out soon, I'll come on to in a minute, they don't reflect that kind of final ultimate declaration of what clusters there are in the Midlands Engine, obviously, because these will kind of evolve and change over time, and there's possibly others that aren't included. But what I think we've hopefully done is provide a foundation through, firstly, a framework for further cluster analysis and metrics for demonstrating attractiveness to whoever it might be, investors or whoever, and then some collateral on a set of broadly identified clusters and within specific areas of the Midlands Engine, driven by that kind of independence and robust evidence base through DataCity, but also all the other partners. So the final outputs are kind of the main stuff is the 23 regional scorecards we published at the end of 2022. I believe it'll be November now, alongside a report which is kind of mainly focused on kind of methodology and policy recommendations written by CBI, well, everyone's fed into it, obviously. And obviously, I hope these are kind of useful for all partners really within the region, but also across the country and wherever. They can all be found on the Midlands Engine Observatory websites. I've put a few links in there, but yeah, I'm sure we'll push those out and make sure that anyone can access them as soon as they can. If not, yeah, please get in touch. There's also some local authority level data where possible. So this is going to be provided to partners such as local authorities and LEPs with the report when that's published as well. Again, you can contact me initially if you want kind of access to these as well, and can maybe look at how that's done in other areas as well. Yeah, happy to take any questions on the project or the data and the findings. Happy to take questions in the first instance, but then we'll also fill our kind of international lead role soon as well. So if Midlands Engine partners in particular want that specific discussion around internationalization, that can be done in the near future. And then we'll certainly continue to use Data City to kind of analyze this data within the project, but also the other stuff that has come in recently, which looks really interesting, to try and harness that power of data across different work streams and geographies and clusters and sectors, etc. So as well as our project we've done here, we've got licenses to the platform so we can access that data whenever we want. So that's really helpful for us and others to analyze the data. But yeah, if you've got any questions, happy to take them in the Q&A or whatever, but I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Yeah, this is just time for a Q&A. So I will stop sharing my screen and I will hand over to Emma, and Alex, who will be running this part of the session.
Yeah, so we've got 10 minutes or so left. So if anyone's got any questions now, or if you prefer to just send them to us afterwards, or want a discussion offline, that's absolutely fine.
Do we have any questions remaining? I'm going to go slightly here. No questions?
Obviously very successful. But yeah, like we say, if there is anything, if you want to ask any of the panelists anything, we'll be sending around an email with contact details for everyone, so feel free to reach out. Otherwise, I guess we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much, Charlie, for coming on.
Thank you.
I hope everybody found that useful, who's watched it, and we are obviously very interested in what you'd like to see moving forward. So we very much use today to sort of show you what we're doing, but we're trying to create a space where it's not just all about what the Data City does. You know, we've presented a number of partners. We'd be more than happy to invite, you know, like Cast and others, or anybody else you think we should have talking about the emerging economy into these sessions. Make sure that it's as useful as possible. We'll keep inviting people to talk about work that they're doing, you know, not just with our data, but in this space, and we'll keep showing sort of updates. You know, we're a startup, we're constantly evolving what we're doing. That evolution is, you know, 100% driven by customers like the Midlands Engine saying, what about, could you, and us trying to find solutions. So yeah, please do let us, you know, give us your problems, not just look at what we're already doing, and we'll try and solve them. Okay, thank you very much.